Have you ever scrolled through social media and seen a suave guy in a designer suit, cruising in a luxury car, sticking his hand out the window to flaunt a waterproof watch, a Face ID phone, and an RFID wallet that's supposedly hacker-proof, and thought to yourself, wow, in this day and age, safety is a given? Not so fast. Flip through history and you'll see that medieval nobles were just as smug. They didn't have AirPods, but they did sport helmets weighing over 20 kilos, and instead of tailored suits, they wrapped themselves in dozens of layers of steel armour, riding around like bosses think of it as Uber, but with 4 legs. But here's the twist. From the past to the present, anyone who thought they were untouchable always ended up meeting some genius who figured out how to shatter that little dream of safety. Medieval battlefields were never decided by knightly honour or gleaming armour. Victory always belonged to tools engineered with ruthless precision, each weapon designed to target the weak spots in an enemy's defences. Behind every triumph stood not just brave knights, but the dark genius of weaponsmiths' men who turned human fear into cold steel, forging those fears into machines of death. Let's start with the warhammer. This weapon was the ultimate symbol of brutal effectiveness. Knights would spend a fortune on plate armour, convinced that it made them nearly invincible in battle. In reality, a finely crafted suit could stop a sword, deflect arrows enough to make any wealthy warrior believe they'd finally cracked the death problem on the battlefield. But then someone invented the warhammer, and suddenly that pricey steel shell wasn't protection anymore. It became the knight's very own mobile coffin. Unlike swords, which would just skid off the armour, the warhammer concentrated all its destructive force onto a tiny spot. One good hit could cave in a helmet, and beneath it, a skull crushed to pieces without even piercing the metal. The physics here are as brutal as they are efficient. All that energy has to go somewhere, and the only destination is the knight's brain. Maybe those knights thought they were wearing medieval tanks, but in reality, they just turned themselves into dinner bells for the Grim Reaper. Clang! One more skull smashed, ready to be served up. Many warhammers even had a sharp spike on the back, turning them into a multi-purpose tool of destruction, one side to smash, the other to pierce. When your enemy looked like a walking tin can, all you needed was a good can opener. This versatility made the warhammer a brutally practical solution to the armour problem of its time. A knight might survive a sword strike thanks to his armour, but the focused impact from a warhammer blow would turn his muscles to jelly inside the suit. That sickening crunch of a warhammer slamming into a helmet, the unmistakable crack, was often the signal that a knight's career, or even his life, was over. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, English troops used warhammers to deal with French knights, bogged down in mud, turning expensive armour from a shield into a deadly trap. What made the warhammer so democratic was its accessibility. Unlike the sword, which took years of dedicated practice, the warhammer required only enough strength to swing and enough rage to aim at someone you hated. That's why the warhammer became wildly popular among common infantrymen, people who had neither the money nor the time for high-level martial arts. You could say this was history's first example of user-friendly design, even if the instructions boiled down to a single line: pointy end toward the enemy. Swing hard. Archaeologists have found warhammers with heads weighing over 3 kilograms, enough to shatter bones right through armour, as long as you swung it from the end of a metre-long handle. Some specimens from Eastern Europe even have their hammerheads worn down from too much use, silent proof of this weapon's real power. Even as armour technology advanced, the warhammer didn't stay the same. Starting as a basic tool, it soon evolved into a specialised battlefield weapon. Armour-piercing heads, reinforced handles, striking faces optimised for maximum damage, even able to punch through Milanese steel. It really was a miniature arms race. The stronger the armour, the nastier the hammer. Knights who spent a lifetime mastering the sword or the lance still wound up getting dropped by a peasant wielding an upgraded tool. There's something truly egalitarian about that. Whether you were noble or commoner, rich or poor, if you faced someone determined to swing a warhammer, your skull was just as fragile as anyone else's. While the warhammer was celebrated for its straightforward brutality, medieval blacksmiths didn't stop inventing there. They went on to create weapons that were even more unpredictable. One of the most notorious, the flail, a spiked ball on a chain. If the warhammer was the reliable draft horse of the weapons world, the flail was its moody, unpredictable artistic cousin. It looked simple: a wooden handle, a chain, and a metal ball bristling with spikes, but this simplicity hid a nightmare for the user. The chain introduced a lag between the swinger's motion and the moment of impact, making it incredibly difficult to time your strike. You were more likely to clock yourself than your opponent. Countless medieval manuscripts describe the agony of learning to wield a flail. Beginners spent months just mastering the art of not smashing themselves in the head before they even dreamed of taking it to battle. Weapons instructors back then must have had the easiest job interview ever. Just let the students knock themselves out. Injuries from the flail were legendary. Military medical texts from all over medieval Europe record every type of training injury imaginable. Even modern archaeologists who try out replica flails walk away with bruises, scrapes, and the occasional broken bone before they ever face a real opponent. The flail was the only medieval weapon with a documented track record of taking out its own wielder. Want to play with a flail? Don't think strength alone will cut it. You need to be a master of spatial awareness, an expert in velocity math, and frankly, the kind of person who drafts a will before every practice session, just in case you need your roommate to open your soup for you at dinner. And yet, despite all these dangers, the flail still became the favourite of quite a few warriors, because it was the true nemesis of heavily armoured knights, especially toward the end of the Middle Ages. Turns out a flexible chain was the real mind hack on the battlefield. When your opponent hid behind a shield, all you had to do was steer the spiked ball around the edge, landing a direct hit on his unprotected ribs. Hello, surprise! You didn't need fancy defense, just one wild swing from a blind angle, and even Sir Knight, no matter how skilled he was at blocking, would have to blurt out, "Wait, what just flew past my ear?" But that's not all. The flail came with what physicists call inertial amplification. The chain worked like an energy booster, turning a simple swing into a whip like snap, focusing all the force into the head of the spiked ball. Modern researchers who've tested flail replicas agree the strike force can be up to 40% higher than weapons of the same weight without a chain, and the spikes make it far easier to punch through metal armour. That's why more than a few knights paid dearly with their own skulls to learn that inertia isn't just an abstract math problem. It's a curse that can turn your $1,000,000 armour into a leaky colander, filtering wishful thinking right out of your head with a single swing. And if you thought the flail came in just one basic version, congratulations, you've seriously underestimated medieval chaos. The standard single chain, single spiked ball flail was already tough to handle, but there were supersized variants with 2 or 3 chains, each with their own spiked heads, turning the wielder into something like a medieval circus performer. Honestly, who's crazier than someone swinging a weapon no one can control then wondering, did I wake up in the right line of work or did I make a terrible mistake? The pinnacle of psychological flail had to be the Eastern European versions. They built hollow chambers into the spiked head, so every swing produced a haunting whistle, enough to rattle anyone's nerves before the fight even began. The moment a knight heard that eerie wind whistling past his helmet, he'd flinch and think, wait, is that sound getting closer? And, why does my helmet have a new hole in it? No wonder knight academies had special classes just to teach how to read a flail, predict the path of the spiked ball, and time your dodges almost like learning lion dancing for Lunar New Year. Even veteran swordsmen and spearmen, confident in their defence, had to admit, facing a flail was like facing a nightmare, since no one could predict where the next strike would land or whether the wielder would accidentally knock himself out. Honestly, just hearing a rattling chain or seeing someone swing a shopping bag might be enough to send a medieval veteran straight back to their PTSD seasons. The real terror wasn't just the enemy, but the pure random luck of that flying spiked ball. But wait, the flail had a life beyond the battlefield too. In many parts of Europe it became a symbol of peasant uprisings. Did you know? The military flail was really just a spiky upgrade of the regular grain threshing flail. Beat the grain in the morning, beat the nobleman at night, turning a farming tool into the stuff of nightmares for both landlords and armoured knights. Imagine it. If you could spend just one day in the Middle Ages, would you choose to be a knight in $1,000,000 armour, or a peasant with a 2-in-1 flail feeding yourself by day, terrorising your enemies by dusk, then bandaging yourself up at night while writing in your diary? Hit myself on the forehead for the 3rd time today, but hey, at least I'm freer than those nobles out there. When chaos erupted, when the fields were burned and dreams of freedom were all that remained, medieval peasants proved to the world that career change isn't just a 21st century thing. They'd look around the kitchen or the drying yard, grab their trusty grain flail, and turn it into a deadly weapon, transforming a survival tool into a legend. Who would have thought these homemade upgrades would actually work so well, becoming the stuff of nightmares for even the shiniest cavalry? Just another day threshing grain, just another night threshing nobles. Uprisings like the 15th century Hussite rebellion in Bohemia showed just how terrifying the flail could be. Armoured knights were left both frightened and baffled. Those spinning, unpredictable heads made it impossible to defend yourself. Even the most battle-hardened cavalryman might freeze for a second, because with just a moment's hesitation, the line between predator and prey could flip in an instant. If the warhammer was the god of brute force, the "your armour's thick, so I'll just hit harder" champion, then the flail was the lord of chaos, the darling of every fighter who loved turning order upside down and planting new nightmares in the heads of warriors who thought nothing could scare them anymore. A medieval battlefield was the kind of place where just one split second of hesitation, one slip in tracking the path of a spinning spiked ball, could be enough to decide your fate. Is that thing about to hit me in the face, or is it swinging around for the back of my head? Oh, there goes my helmet! Despite its dangers and unpredictability, a flail only revealed its full power in the hands of a truly seasoned player. But history ironically witnessed the rise of even simpler weapons that broke all the rules of noble warfare. This was the age of the minimalist assassins, the legendary Godendag. It sounds fancy, but in Flemish, Godendag simply means "good morning," a friendly greeting that actually hides the threat of a devastating smack, like saying, "Hope you have a nice day, nobleman." At first glance, Godendag looks humble, just a solid hunk of wood with a sharp metal tip. But its power comes from smart design. The sharp end was for stabbing through armour, horses, or aristocratic egos. The heavy club body was for delivering a knockout blow when a knight had been knocked off his horse. Thanks to this two-in-one combo, Godendag became every armoured cavalryman's nightmare, a true infantry kid versus rich kid on horseback story. Godendag's historical turning point came at the Battle of Courtrai in 1302, known as the Battle of the Golden Spurs. On that day, the militia of Flanders, most of them just peasants armed with Godendags, sent the elite French knights packing, leaving behind not only their armour but also the fancy ropes they'd brought along for tying up prisoners. Who would have guessed that a ragtag army of cloth-wearing farmers could smash Europe's finest cavalry using nothing but cheap, light, easy-to-learn weapons? The tactic was beautifully simple and deadly. Brace the club against the ground, sharp tip pointed up, and wait for the horse to charge. Knights were hot-headed, horses didn't know any better, and Godendag didn't care in the slightest. Once a knight was knocked off his horse, he became a stationary target for the club's body. A single crushing blow was usually all it took to end a nobleman's lesson in overconfidence. The battlefield was so littered with golden spurs, the symbol of knighthood, that people started calling the battle after them. From then on, historians have referred to Courtrai as the death knell for the era of armoured cavalry's dominance in Europe. Godendag didn't stop evolving. Short handles for close quarters, long handles for the front lines, custom tips for each new type of armour. Arguably, Godendag's greatest legacy is the proof that sometimes the simplest things decide the outcome, and that common people, when united and creative, can topple even the mightiest monuments of invincibility. For centuries, knights had painted themselves as heroes on horseback, decked out in lavish gear, and even rigged the rules of war just to keep as many peasants out of the fight as possible. That shining armour wasn't just for arrows, it was an invisible fence keeping anyone without cash off the battlefield. But in the end, all those illusions were smashed by a humble club, the Godendag. It wasn't flashy, wasn't complicated, just a rough forged iron tip and a solid stick any village blacksmith could make one. Yet, in the hands of those who dared to rise up, the Godendag was strong enough to shatter all faith in noble superiority. After Courtrai, even snobby lords who'd once seen foot soldiers as walking target practice had to mention them with a little more respect and maybe a touch of fear. Godendags became so common that every time a rebellion started, it took only a few weeks for hundreds of militiamen to arm themselves, forming a wall of spear points that no horse dared charge. Unlike swords or flails, which required a decade of training, Godendag only needed a few days' instruction for rookies to become knight slayers. Infantrymen became a unified wall of steel, blocking attacks that previously only nobles would have dared to imagine. Not only did the Godendag kick off a wave of battlefield democracy, It left a lasting mark. The whole idea of a dual-purpose weapon inspired generations of polearms and battle axes. Even when halberds and poleaxes arrived, the Goddendag stayed in the game, with militias all the way into the 16th century, simply because it was so easy to make, easy to use, and honestly almost too effective. It wasn't until firearms took over that the Goddendag finally faded into history, leaving behind one eternal truth. A revolutionary weapon doesn't have to be fancy. Sometimes all it takes is a smart, affordable design to change the course of an era. But of course, every time humanity gets bored with simplicity, someone always wants to supersize everything. So from the humble club, we jump to the Zweihänder, the giant two-handed sword, the ultimate monument to breaking all the size limits. If the Warhammer solved problems with basic physics, and the flail represented pure chaos theory, then the Zweihänder was the champion of compensation culture. The bigger the sword, the safer you felt, or maybe the more everyone else started worrying. Just listen to the name two-handed sword, but honestly, it should have been called the sword that takes 2 lifetimes of training and 3 changes of heart just to carry. A standard Zweihänder measured from 1.5 to nearly 2 meters long, with a blade alone over 1.2 meters. The grip? Forget 2 hands. There was room for the whole family. This wasn't just a sword, it was a personal siege engine. The average weight ranged from 3 to 6.5 kilograms. That might not sound like much, but try swinging one non-stop in the middle of a screaming, dusty battlefield, and you'll realise that lasting a few minutes would qualify you for the Olympics. The German Landsknecht mercenaries were famous masters of the giant sword, and as an incentive, anyone who could wield a Zweihänder well-earned double pay and seriously generous rations. Their job application probably read, "Must have arms like oak branches, nerves of steel, and not care if you ever brush your own hair again." Their main role was breaking the line, charging forward to snap pike formations with a single mighty swing, opening up gaps for comrades to rush through. Pike formations were considered walls of steel, but even they would hesitate when faced with a flagpole-sized sword charging their way. If you've ever thought, wielding a weapon must look cool, just imagine standing face to face with a guy carrying a blade taller than you, walking forward with the expression of someone who just doesn't care. Even the bravest fighters might take a step back to calculate their escape route. The Zweihänder's design kept growing up over the years, like a spoiled rich kid enrolled in every sport and art class available. At first it was just a supersized longsword, but over time blacksmiths got more creative, adding features that made every opponent take notice. Most famously, there's the ricasso, an unsharpened section of blade just above the guard, usually wrapped in leather so you could grip the sword further up for some close quarters sword dancing. Sounds cool, but if your sword is so long you need a handhold halfway up the blade, maybe you've misunderstood the concept of two-handed sword just a bit. That's not all. Many Zweihänders came equipped with parrying hooks or extra pegs near the guard. Not only did these protect your hands and add leverage, but they could also be used to catch, lock, or even disarm your opponent. With a perfectly timed swing, you could hook both the enemy's sword and his last nerve. No exaggeration, the Zweihänder was the Swiss Army knife of the Olympic-sized weapons world. It could slice, thrust, hook, trap, and not to mention, it was the perfect prop for showing off at any parade. There are military observers who recorded scenes of entire enemy armies panicking and bolting just from the sight of Landsknechts trudging forward with Zweihänders on their shoulders, swords as big as lightning rods. That image alone was enough to send terror rippling through a whole battlefield. Just one look at those walking forges, and all the bravado in the world would vanish in a puff of smoke, with everyone opting for the tactical retreat to save their skins. Half the battle was psychological. When you're facing a line of door guards wielding blades taller than you are, running away is often the smartest way to preserve your dignity. Training with a Zweihänder was its own kind of art, a dance with inertia. It wasn't about fighting against the weight, but learning how to move with it. The old training manuals described stances, motions, and footwork that were practically ballet. True masters could turn both their body and their massive sword into a killing dance, always in motion, never a sitting duck while regaining their balance. Honestly, every Zweihänder training manual should have started with a warning. Your results may vary depending on how often you skip arm day at the gym. In the Battle of Bicocca in 1522, the Landsknecht and their Zweihänders made history by slicing straight through the once invincible Swiss pike wall. The horror of seeing the steel pike walls shredded by swords so long they deserved their own zip code sapped all the morale from the Swiss troops, marking the beginning of a new era for European infantry tactics. That day, the Swiss learned a hard lesson. When your enemies show up with weapons, as long as your broken dreams, no invincible formation is truly safe from a quick fix. Still, the Zweihander remained a specialist weapon, wielded only by elite units because just forging one ate up a fortune in high-grade steel, required master blacksmiths, and practically meant you had to feed a bodybuilder to swing it. That's why these apartment-sized swords never went mainstream. They were reserved for the super rich, super strong, and super extravagant mercenary squads. Even so, the Zweihander survived on battlefields far longer than anyone would have guessed, right up to the early 17th century when gunfire echoed across Europe. Sometimes a gigantic sword blocking a castle gate was the perfect way to declare, "This road is closed, try another life if you want to get through." The Zweihanders still preserved in museums today don't just shock with their size, they captivate with their craftsmanship. Engraved designs, gold inlays, engraved names. Each blade was a trophy, a badge of pride for an entire mercenary unit, used for parades, ceremonies, and, of course, to tell tales like, "Back in my day I snapped 100 pikes in half with this thing." Some Zweihanders were so elaborately decorated that people wondered if they ever saw real action, or if they just showed up at parades, the medieval equivalent of supercars that exist mainly for photo ops before being tucked away in the garage. If the Zweihander represented the bigger is better mindset, then medieval weaponsmiths were quick to invent tools for the more delicate jobs, because let's be real, not every battle was about hacking people to pieces. Sometimes, keeping your enemy alive was actually way more lucrative. There's nothing like a fat ransom check to make your day. Welcome to the Man-Catcher, the ultimate tool for catch them alive, cash out later. Unlike the Zweihander, which announced its arrival with a giant swing everyone could see, the Man-Catcher was all about cold, silent efficiency. It was a long pole with a hinged metal collar at the end, lined inside with hooks and spikes, just the thing for locking down a neck, an arm, or any last shred of resistance, all without spilling a single drop of blood. Knights and nobles were the blue-chip investments of medieval society. If you caught one alive, the ransom could be worth as much as a small city's yearly taxes. Kill them, and all you get is their armour. Take them alive, and suddenly the wire transfer notifications just keep rolling in. There are stories of French nobles whose ransom, adjusted for today's money, would be worth around $6 million a number that would make even modern soldiers consider a career change to professional man-catcher. Wielding a man-catcher wasn't about brute strength like the warhammer. What mattered was split-second timing and perfect placement. One quick hook around the neck or leg, a sharp twist, and you could yank a would-be war hero right off his horse, leaving him waddling around in his shiny armour, a prisoner on the very battlefield where he'd just been showing off. Everyone watching couldn't help but think, so that's what all that expensive armour was for, to play the part of a fancy pet fish. Closed face helmets, supposedly impenetrable, turned out to be fatal weaknesses, since all it took was an opponent sneaking up from a blind spot to make you easy pickings. Nobody thought to add a rearview mirror to their helmet, so off they went, dragged away without a chance to protest. Depending on the region, the man-catcher came in all kinds of flavours. The German version had a long handle, perfect for yanking knights off horseback. The Mediterranean models added springs, locking pins, and sometimes even the tighter you struggle, the more it hurts features. Medieval blacksmiths had already mastered the more you resist, the worse it gets. Philosophy centuries before modern cops ever thought of handcuffs. And using the man-catcher wasn't a solo sport. Military records describe squads of 3 to 5 repo men charging into battle when controlling the weapon, the rest subduing and tying up the prisoner. If you landed a VIP, everyone got a bonus classic asset recovery, except this time the asset could walk, cry, and show off some seriously shiny armour. The man-catcher wasn't just for the battlefield either. It was the perfect law enforcement tool in big cities like Venice or London, where you needed to restrain criminals in a crowd without causing, well, a bloody traffic jam. No need for superhero warriors, just send in a few repo guys with man-catchers, and the streets were peaceful again. Pure medieval style, security that lasts with full service delivery. The ability to restrain without causing lethal damage made the man-catcher the perfect weapon for any situation where swinging wildly would just turn the crowd into a riot, in other words. the ideal tool for anyone who wanted to catch people while still keeping the peace. Today, we have animal protection laws, but in the Middle Ages, catch and release meant catch as tight as possible, then only release once the ransom hit your account. Let's just say medieval conservation of people was very different from Alaska salmon season. Nobles, of course, got creative to avoid being caught. Some commissioned custom neck armour to foil the man-catcher's grip, others secretly trained in repo man detection, and officers always instructed their troops to target anyone holding a man-catcher first. Nothing sparks human ingenuity like the fear of getting dragged home on a leash and having your family sell the vacation villa to buy your freedom. And if you thought the man-catcher only survived the wars, think again. When firearms made most medieval weapons obsolete, the man-catcher hung on because sometimes subduing someone at a distance without killing them is a puzzle even the modern world hasn't fully solved. In fact, up through the 19th century, many police forces still used upgraded man-catchers to arrest suspects without drawing a gun. All in all, when your weapon is both a law enforcement tool and a mobile ATM for collecting aristocratic ransoms, you treat it like a family heirloom polishing and maintaining it with the same care collectors give their classic cars. But let's leave behind the man-catcher's brand of conditional mercy and head to a corner of the Middle Ages where compassion wasn't even in the blueprint. The morning star, the ultimate symbol of medieval brutality. Picture a heavy iron ball bristling with steel spikes, created for one purpose only, to smash and pierce anything in its path. If nightmares could be forged from metal, they'd look exactly like a morning star. The name Morning Star might sound poetic and sparkling since its shape was inspired by the planet Venus, shining in the dawn sky, but don't be fooled. This star's only job was to send foes on their final journey, not to grant anyone's wishes. The Middle Ages were full of these ironically beautiful names for utterly deadly weapons. This star guaranteed that your opponent wouldn't have anything left to wish for, unlike its cousin. The flail with its wild whip-like chain, the Morning Star fixed its spiked ball directly to a wooden handle, making it easier to control and much less likely to bounce back and whack its wielder in the chaos of battle. This was a nightmare with a steering wheel. Every swing was a direct message to the afterlife. A classic Morning Star was made of 3 parts: a wooden handle, a reinforced metal fitting, and a spiked ball that looked like an angry iron hedgehog. The head could be as small as an orange or as big as a coconut, with spikes of every length and sometimes weighing up to 4 or 5 kilograms. Just imagining getting hit by it is enough to make your whole body hurt. Its design philosophy? Simple. The more spikes, the less mercy, the harder to heal. Physics? All the weapon's power was concentrated into those tiny spikes. One well-placed blow could puncture armour so thick that swords and hammers would just bounce off. The wounds left by a Morning Star made medieval doctors sigh in despair. No matter how you stitch it up, there are just too many holes. Archaeological evidence testifies to the Morning Star's cruelty. Skeletons with shattered bones and clusters of small holes, a calling card that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Sometimes, just looking at the bones was enough to identify the culprit. Only the Morning Star had the personality to cause death by too many holes to count. Using a Morning Star didn't require fancy swordplay, but you did need shoulders like bronze drums. Training manuals of the time recommended extra workouts for the shoulders and arms using heavier practice models, until one swing could turn a knight's armour into a collection of dents. Once mastered, the Morning Star delivered terrifying results, especially against those who felt invincible in their steel suits. Because this weapon didn't just end a life, it left a business card for future generations, so even archaeologists centuries later would shake their heads and mutter, "This really was the nightmare of the age of armour." The Morning Star was basically the Middle Ages version of a gym membership, except, instead of showing off your biceps in front of a mirror, you racked up a brutally impressive clean up the enemy scorecard. Using a Morning Star was as versatile as a HIIT workout. Knights favoured shorter handles, letting them swing from horseback and use the momentum of both rider and horse to deliver instant knockouts, no overtime needed. Infantry preferred long-handled versions, sweeping in wide arcs to create a no-go zone around themselves, or stabbing forward like a spear to take care of anyone who wandered into range. This flexibility made the Morning Star the ultimate adaptation specialist. Wherever you were, However you stood, it could turn any sunny day into your enemy's most painful memory. But even scarier was its psychological impact. Just seeing a row of soldiers holding morning stars at the front line could make even the toughest veterans hesitate. The brutal look of those spiked heads tapped straight into every primal fear, turning battle fever into cold sweats. Many commanders would deliberately line up their morning stars front and centre, hoping to make the enemy drop their swords before a single blow was struck. I mean, who could stay brave when staring down what looked like medieval torture tools straight out of a nightmare? Across Europe and Asia, the morning star came in countless variations. Eastern Europe liked lots of short spikes for shredding lighter armour. Western Europe went for fewer, longer spikes to pierce even the thickest plate. It evolved alongside armour tech. Every new development in armour was soon met by a new strategy for getting the morning star past it. Not only did it haunt the battlefield, the morning star became a visual icon in religion. Medieval art often shows angels smiting demons with this very weapon, as if to say, even faith needs a few spikes for backup. That's why it picked up the nickname Holy Water Sprinkler, because every swing sprinkled in the most dramatic, darkly comic medieval style. Nothing says, go with God more persuasively than a face full of steel spikes. It even delivered final absolution, plus a complimentary dental plan, although nobody ever survived long enough to show off their new smile. Off the battlefield, the morning star lived on as a symbol of brutality, showing up everywhere in paintings of hell to represent punishment and divine power. In some places, they even hung morning stars over city gates or courthouses, a three-dimensional warning. Around here, the law doesn't just talk, it can make you hurt. Maybe a lot of medieval weapons have faded into obscurity, but this spiky nightmare remains the undisputed icon of violence, a vivid reminder of an age where power was measured by how many holes you could punch in your enemy's armour. If the morning star was all about just swing hard and let fate sort it out, medieval blacksmiths, true hackers of their era, didn't stop there. They started inventing weapons that were much more high-tech, with the bec de Corbin being the crown jewel of think before you bash logic. The name sounds classy. Bec de Corbin is French for raven's beak, and rightly so. That signature sharp hooked point has given many a suit of armour a reason to be afraid. A member of the long handle, the bec de Corbin boasted a highly versatile metal head, packing multiple forms of pain into one deadly package. One side had a razor-sharp beak, perfect for biting through enemy armour. The other side was a heavy hammerhead, meant to smash and destroy defences, and on top, a pointed spike like a spear perfect for mixing it up whenever you felt like changing tactics. This 3-in-1 design made the bec de Corbin the Swiss Army knife of carnage. If you brought this to battle, you'd never have to wonder if you brought the right tool. You want me to crush, stab, or pierce? I'm happy to oblige. For a skilled user, it only took a few moves to switch seamlessly between stabbing, smashing, and thrusting, leaving even the toughest armour with a pounding heart. Old martial arts manuals even included specialised techniques for each type of attack, proving this was a specialist weapon, not just a scary-looking stick. But what really gave the bec de Corbin its timeless power was old-school physics specifically, the magic of leverage. All you needed was a wooden shaft about 1.5 to 2 metres long, and you could multiply your swing's force many times over. When all that energy was channeled into a tiny beak, hammer face, or spear tip just a few millimetres wide, the pressure was enough to punch through even the thickest plate armour, sometimes exceeding 4,000 PSAO, double what most armour could actually withstand. And every time a bec de Corbin did its job, the whole battlefield heard its signature sound, a piercing screech as the beak ripped through steel, followed by a dry, unmistakable thud as it sank into flesh. Some chroniclers even wrote that seasoned soldiers could tell just by the sound. Ah, there goes another express delivery from the raven's beak, no signature required. Learning the bec de Corbin wasn't easy. The unbalanced weight made it much easier to hurt yourself than your opponent at first. Manuals from the era laid out a progression. Start with static targets, move up to mobile ones, and only then graduate to the battlefield. Anyone who mastered this weapon quickly became the stuff of nightmares for knights, because the bec de Corbin could pull you off your horse, break open your armour like a tin can, or finish the fight with one well-placed blow to a weak spot. No wonder noble hunting infantrymen loved it. the mightiest, best-equipped cavalry could find themselves dragged down and finished off, their shining armour no match for a wall of these long-handled can openers. Historic battles like Courtrai in 1302 prove the point. Flemish infantry with a lineup of these polearms utterly crushed the elite French cavalry, marking a true turning point in European infantry warfare. Sometimes, all it takes is a single, well-placed strike to send centuries of cutting-edge protective technology back to square one. If you wanted a quality bec de Corbin, you couldn't just order one from the local blacksmith/bagel vendor. This weapon was the result of an entire network of expert craftsmen. The blacksmith had the hardest job creating a head strong enough to shatter all dreams of armour, but flexible at the joints so it wouldn't break during combat. The carpenter couldn't slack off either, only straight-grained ash or oak would do, ensuring the shaft could withstand thunderbolt impacts without snapping like a popsicle stick. Even attaching the head was an art. High-end models had thick sockets, iron bands and tight fittings so you didn't end up with half your weapon flying off mid-swing. Just the look of the bec de Corbin, especially that menacing hooked beak, was enough to get everyone's adrenaline pumping before the fight even started. Picture it. Hundreds of Flemish infantry lined up, raven beaks glinting in the morning sun, like a flock of giant crows getting ready for a nobleman's barbecue out on the marsh. For those knights who'd poured their fortunes into full-option suits of armour, that sight was like watching someone walk up to your unbreakable safe with a full set of lockpicks, the kind of thing the manufacturer swore could never happen. But real life, as always, has other plans. The result? All that money, sweat, and pride instantly became appetizers for soldiers wielding these aristocrat openers. Depending on the region, the bec de Corbin evolved into all kinds of creative schools. The Italian version, a long slender beak, perfect for piercing the famous Milanese armour. The French preferred a large hammerhead, balancing smash and stab, great for bone setting, or heart piercing, depending on your mood. Eastern Europe added hooks and prongs, making it easy to yank foes off balance, disarm them, or pull knights right out of the saddle. The bec de Corbin stayed in action from the 13th all the way into the early 16th century, outlasting countless battles and every new armour upgrade that came along. Every time a new type of armour hit the market, blacksmiths would just update the bec de Corbin with the latest armour-busting edition, the ultimate arms race with no finish line. Its impact wasn't just limited to muddy, bloody medieval battlefields. That iconic weapon head passed its genes to all sorts of modern long-handled tools today. You'll see its descendants in everything from rescue gear and police breaching tools to SWAT gadgets. Just pack prying, stabbing and smashing into a single head and slap it on a long-handle instant classic. The idea of a multi-function head on a long lever for maximum force may sound ancient, but it's still a hot trend from military drills to big city emergency teams. If the bec de Corbin was the master key for every kind of armour on land, then medieval military engineers were just as inventive when it came to taking out enemies way out of arm's reach. The ballista, the crossbow monster, was the answer to that age-old question. How do you handle the enemy without ever having to run up close? Imagine a gigantic crossbow, powerful enough to fire a bolt as heavy as a gym kettlebell at mini-rocket speed punching through not just one, but multiple shields, suits of armour, or even several unlucky people standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The mechanism was simple but brutal. Twist thick ropes or animal sinew to store up insane amounts of energy, then unleash it all at once in a single deadly shot. A ballista bolt could weigh up to 12 kilograms, fly at almost 100 miles per hour, and tear gaping holes in any enemy formation. Unlike a bow and arrow, which followed an easy-to-predict arc, the ballista's bolt flew straight and fast, so fast that your eyes barely had time to go wide before it was all over. No wonder the ballista earned the nickname God's Dice. In hand-to-hand combat you might dodge or block, but facing a ballista, all you could do was pray you weren't the name on that bolt. Operating this death machine was no solo act. It usually took a crew of 3 to 5, one to aim, the others to crank the ropes, load the bolt and adjust the angle. A well-trained team could get off 2 or 3 shots a minute, not a huge rate, but each one could sow pure terror through enemy ranks. In fact, ballista gunners even had their own slang and were treated like an elite special forces unit. With a single well-aimed shot, they could turn the tide of an entire battle doing more damage than any close combat troop ever could. The ballista, the divine crossbow of the Middle Ages, definitely didn't come in just one size. There were compact models you could mount on a chariot, with just 2 crew cranking away fire, reload, and dash off like an ancient anti-tank gun. The giant versions, meanwhile, stood like mobile fortresses in the middle of a field, with 8 people hauling on ropes, launching rocks weighing up to 50 kilos at that point. The ballista was practically a mini cannon that could punch through any formation. Monsters like these stayed in use well into the era of early firearms, while countless other weapons retired to the museum. The ballista taught the first lesson in force optimization. With just a handful of operators, you could strike terror into hundreds of enemies, all far beyond arm's reach. Still, the ballista's power was mostly focused on small groups, or whoever was unlucky enough to be standing in its line of fire. But medieval engineers weren't satisfied yet. Their quest for precise, lethal strikes led to the invention of the Scorpion. Just hearing the name is enough to make you itch. Fast, deadly, and always able to sting from a hidden spot. If the ballista was a big gun for hitting multiple targets, the Scorpion was the true sniper of the Middle Ages. Originally a Roman invention, the Scorpion slept through the early Middle Ages before roaring back to life in the Crusades. Its breakthrough design used 2 twisted skeins of animal sinew, or, yes, even human hair. Every time you pulled the trigger, a tiny bolt would rocket out at terrifying speed, piercing shields, armour, and anyone within 350 metres, leaving every officer on the field thinking, "Is it my turn yet?" The Scorpion's genius was in target selection. You could pick off officers, commanders, or the loudest guy shouting slogans and send him to the afterlife before he even knew what hit him. Nobody ever knew when their number was up. 1 second you're rallying your troops, the next you're checking in at the pearly gates with a hole you definitely didn't want. A well-drilled Scorpion crew could fire up to 10 shots a minute, which sounds almost like a machine gun. Historians have recorded that at the Siege of Acre in 1191, just 30 Scorpion teams could early retire over 800 defending soldiers. On some mornings, roll call for the defenders wasn't who's alive, but who didn't get drilled full of holes last night. The most terrifying thing wasn't just the body count, it was the psychological impact. Standing on the walls under Scorpion fire, every defender developed death anxiety nerves so raw that entire cities recorded cases of Scorpion fever, flinching at shadows, jumping at every sound, and finding it impossible to focus on anything else. Many people just hoped someone else would win the lottery before it was their turn. If the Scorpion was the virtuoso of precision death, medieval engineers went even bigger. Enter the trebuchet, the king of siege artillery, a massive stone-flinging machine that haunted every architect and castle owner in the Middle Ages. Its principle would make any physics teacher hit "Ike." A huge counterweight drops, flinging the other end up with titanic force, hurling 90 or even 100-kilogram rocks more than 300 meters. Walls that were never breached were reduced to rubble in just a few days of flying stone therapy. Fortresses once thought invincible ended up as nothing but ruins after the king of the cannons spoke. The trebuchet didn't just smash castles, it crushed the pride of every medieval architect. One day you were a bold defender, the next you were just another empty house hunter scrambling for a new place to hide. Medieval mechanical engineering truly reached its artistic peak, and let's be clear, that peak usually landed smack on top of whatever unlucky castle happened to be in trebuchet range. The biggest of these super weapons needed a team of 60 people just to operate, and could launch stones weighing over 300 pounds like it was nothing. Chroniclers described their destructive power with images of handmade earthquakes. One direct hit on a tower, and everything would be reduced to dust, fading away as if the tower had never existed. As for the townsfolk inside, just the creaking of the trebuchet's ropes was enough to make everyone's hair stand on end, like hearing the bomb bay doors open on a plane directly overhead. The only difference, back then there were no bomb shelters, just prayers and a readiness to run. The trebuchet's ammo storage was where medieval creativity really went wild. Rocks were standard, but besiegers loved to mix things up for psychological warfare. Diseased animal carcasses, severed heads, and sometimes even live prisoners could all be given a one-way flight into the city square. The most notorious example was the Siege of Kaffa in 1347, when Mongol forces catapulted plague-infected corpses over the walls, Many historians think this was the opening shot that unleashed the Black Death across Europe. Biological warfare in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly subtle, but it sure made a lasting impression. Nothing inspires surrender faster than watching your deceased neighbour drop out of the sky into your courtyard. But even beyond raw firepower, the trebuchet delivered a psychological punch like nothing else. Once it existed, no wall was truly safe, no fortress really invincible. In many places, the mere sight of enemy troops setting up a trebuchet was enough to trigger a quick surrender. Nobody wanted to star in the next disaster movie. Wall down, roof gone. In the end, these 10 weapons represent the true high-tech of medieval warfare and the endless creativity of the human mind, even when applied to the fine art of destruction. From the simplest spike club to the largest siege machines, the story of medieval weaponry is one of constant innovation, ingenious craftsmanship, and that most ancient survival instinct. You can sleep when you've won. And now, after you've enjoyed this all-you-can-eat buffet of skull-crushing hammers, armour-piercing morning stars, long-range crossbows, and the occasional corpse-launching catapult, here's hoping your dreams tonight won't be haunted by knights clashing and bashing on the edge of sleep. If you hear a ballista cranking or smell roasting meat from a trebuchet in your dreams, relax, it's just the overactive imagination of a history fan. Sleep tight and sweet dreams, or at least, may you never dream of being trebucheted into your neighbour's backyard.